had to take action, I think.
Yeah. Prince Andrew has given up his royal titles, but he's still a prince. Why is that, and what will the real-life consequences of this move for him be?
Well, firstly, the reason he's still a prince is he is the son of Queen Elizabeth. And so that was one thing that can't be removed, but his HRH was already in abeyance. Now, also of significance, of course, he ceases to be a duke. He can't use the title, and Sarah Ferguson, who's his devoted ex-wife, and who, quite frankly, is brought nothing but shame on the monarchy. My opinion, they deserve each other, quite frankly. It may sound unkind, but she's been ill. But the facts of the matter are that there's a litany of appalling judgments, bad friendships, and extraordinary behavior going back decades for both of them. So far as affecting him the one other way, he's still a councillor of state, as far as I know. But the point is, only working royals can act as a councillor of state, and that's in the absence of the monarch. So, I mean, that is something that will never happen. And also, of course, he is no longer a Knight of the Garter. Now, that is something that it's the most prestigious order of chivalry, dates back to the 14th century, and obviously, I mean, he was previously attending church service, but not the procession outside. The point was the royal family didn't know what to do with Andrew, but also it's a question as well of their good work. And certainly geopolitically, it's very, very significant these days, as you know. I mean, with Ukraine, with President Trump, with a whole variety of issues. It was all of this endless sleaze and scandal was overshadowing things.
Yeah, and the royal family today hopes to put all of that behind itself. That was royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
For more, let's cross over to our correspondent Charlotte Chelsen-Pill in London. Charlotte, Prince Andrew had already stepped back from public duties over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. So why is the scandal making headlines again 5 years later?
Well, the fact is that this story has never really been far from the headlines at all. Just a few years ago, it was making headlines here in the UK due to a civil case involving his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. The case saw him settle, paying millions of pounds. He, of course, as he has done again this evening, denying vigorously any wrongdoing. But Prince Andrew has been set by a number of scandals in recent years, hitting the headlines most recently in the last few days, in fact, due to the imminent publication of a posthumous memoir from Virginia Giuffre. We know that she details her allegations against Prince Andrew. In that, there is, of course, therefore, a lot of speculation about what may be coming out in just the next few days.
So what prompted King Charles to take action now?
Well, yeah, while Prince Andrew says very clearly in the statement that he's put out this evening that he's taken this decision to give up these titles, the inference certainly is that he was under the influence or pressure from King Charles. And in fact, we can infer that from the very first sentence of the statement. He's saying that the decision to give up the titles was made in discussion with the king, my immediate and wider family. So it does appear here that a decision was taken, that this simply couldn't go on and something had to be done beyond what has already been done. And of course, this is a very significant step. This is the first time that this Duke title, the title has been removed from a Duke in 100 years. What this may do is calm questions about what more the king could do. What isn't yet clear, though, is whether this move will draw a line under what has undoubtedly been a very difficult chapter for the royal family.
Now, Prince Andrew has given up his royal titles, but he does remain a prince. Why is that, and what will the real-life consequences be for him?
Yeah, well, that title was conferred to him upon birth as the son of Queen Elizabeth II. So for that reason, he will retain that title. But yes, the other titles he is giving up here. this is just the latest in a series of humiliations for Prince Andrew. We know that he's given up titles in the past, retreating from royal life. We know that in practice what this means is he's also retreating from any public life as well. There have often been questions raised if he's seen appearing at any time alongside the royal family. That happened most recently at the funeral of a member of the royal family, and we have been hearing too that he will not join the royal family for any Christmas celebrations or events. So, as I say, this is the latest in a series of very humiliating moments for Prince Andrew.
That's DW correspondent Charlotte Chelsen-Pill. Thank you so much for all of that context.
We're going to dive straight in with our main story tonight, which concerns CBS News, one of the most trusted names in American journalism. It gave us Edward R. Murrow's Harvest of Shame, Walter Cronkite delivering the news of JFK's assassination, and of course, this.
In recent months, a kind of underground fashion has spread among marijuana smokers. It involves the fancy paper used to roll the joints, as they're sometimes called.
Cigarette papers manufactured in this country, France, Mexico, and Spain now amount to big business, mainly because of the boom in grass, pot, tea, Mary Jane, reefers, giggle grass, or marijuana.
Wow, someone really did their research into weed synonyms back then. I just wish he'd kept going. Giggle grass, bong weed, power flower, magic cabbage, Lucifer's lettuce, smoky dokey, whizzle bizzle, and of course, checking in at the Blitz Carlton. Specifically, we're going to talk about CBS's parent company, Paramount, and its recent merger with Skydance Media, a deal largely powered by the money of Larry Ellison, one of the richest men on earth and notable Trump supporter, with the company now run by his son David, a man with resting just checked into the White Lotus face. There are already some worrying signs regarding what this takeover might mean for CBS News in particular, starting with the fact that this guy is thrilled about it.
I think ABC is very bad. I think NBC is very bad. And CBS has a new owner, so we have hope for CBS. CBS has a great new owner, my opinion.
Yeah, it is never a great sign when Donald Trump, seen here fresh from a trip to Sephora to colour match his hair to his skin, loves a management decision that you've made. But he does have a lot to be happy about. In order for Skydance to get its merger approved by Brendan Carr's FCC, it committed to adopt measures that can root out the bias that has undermined trust in the national news media. One of those measures was installing this former Conservative think tank CEO as CBS News' new ombudsman. But this Monday, Ellison took a much bigger step.
A major shift in the landscape of TV news. Paramount Skydance announcing that they've made Barry Weiss editor-in-chief of CBS News and acquired her online news and commentary organization, The Free Press. She's a registered independent who at one point called herself politically homeless, unrepresented by the two main U.S. parties.
OK, first, politically homeless sounds like how you describe Rudy Giuliani's current fashion sense, but it is true. Paramount has bought the Free Press for $150 million, and Barry Weiss, its co-founder, will now be setting the editorial strategy, vision and focus for CBS Mornings, CBS Evening News, Face the Nation and even 60 Minutes. Also, instead of reporting to the president of CBS News, Weiss will apparently report directly to David Ellison. And look, if you're not familiar with Barry Weiss, you should know she's a proud contrarian who in public appearances will inevitably deliver some version of this pitch.
I confound people because I'm Jewish. I've always thought I was liberal. I'm gay. I'm married to a woman. Like, that's my life. You would think that I'm liberal and I would just go along with the flow. It's like, I look like them, I think like them, I eat at the same restaurants, but I don't think all the same things. And I'm not scared to say when I disagree. And I think that's really pissed people off throughout my career.
OK, first and least importantly, the reboot of Between Two Ferns looks terrible, but that is her basic self. She's a liberal who's brave enough to disagree with other liberals, and along the way she's accumulated admirers from Jeff Bezos to Meghan McCain, and from Amy Coney Barrett to Joe Rogan. And if you're thinking, wow, that's not a very ideologically broad from and to, you're starting to catch on, because there are times where she's a little more explicit about what she believes, like when she gave a speech to the Conservative Federalist Society featuring this fun joke.
I'm a gay woman who is moderately pro-choice. I know that there are some people in this room who don't believe that my marriage should have been legal. And that's okay, because we're all Americans who want lower taxes.
Good one. And you can almost hear that room unclench after she basically says, I know you think I deserve fewer rights, but don't worry, besties, we're still chill. And while that is obviously framed as a joke, it's also a setup to her saying in all seriousness, I am here because I know that in the fight for the West, who my allies really are, and she goes on to say, among other things, the wave of so-called progressive prosecutors has proven to be an immensely bad thing for law and order. And I've got to say, for someone who claims they are politically homeless, she sure seems awfully at home in that room. And look, this isn't the first time an outsider billionaire has tried thumbing the scale of a news organisation. We've seen Jeff Bezos increasingly meddle with the Washington Post, and Patrick Soon-Shiong do the same at the LA Times. But this feels like the most sweeping change yet, and at one of the few remaining prestige names in news. And if one person has suddenly been handed this much power over a whole news organisation, it is worth knowing who that one person is. So tonight, let's take a look at Barry Weiss. And let's start with the fact that she's been given editorial control of a massive news organisation, even though she's never run a TV network, has no experience directing television coverage, and as one 60 Minutes producer pointed out, is not even a reporter. That is true. She didn't come up through the news side of a newspaper, but through the opinion pages, which are a very different thing. She really made a name for herself after she was hired by the op-ed page for the New York Times in 2017. And to hear her tell it, it was for a pretty simple reason.
To put it bluntly, I was brought in, along with Bret Stephens from the Wall Street Journal, as a kind of intellectual diversity hire. My job, explicitly, was to bring in voices that wouldn't otherwise naturally appear in the New York Times, either because other editors wouldn't think to commission them, or the writers themselves would think, you know, the New York Times would never accept me.
Yeah, she was apparently tasked with finding voices that the Times op-ed page would never accept, which is already a big claim, given that before she got hired there, it published op-eds from, and this is true, Muammar Gaddafi and Vladimir Putin. If the Times had been around in the 15th century, I'm guessing it would have given an opinion piece to Vlad the Impaler. Drinking the blood of my enemies isn't disgusting, it's beautiful and courageous. In any case, Weiss started getting attention at the Times for writing provocative pieces like this one, in which she argued that the left had gone too far in policing cultural appropriation. This one, a largely sympathetic profile of the intellectual dark web, a term that she popularised for people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. And this one, suggesting progressives were so focused on labelling fellow Americans fascists, they missed opportunities to call out real fascism, which is just some weapons-grade whataboutism. That piece, by the way, also got attention for the fact that Weiss linked to posts from the official Antifa Twitter account that was actually a well-known hoax site, which is pretty embarrassing. You don't expect a Times writer to fall for online hoaxes like they're your 75-year-old aunt on Facebook who keeps posting that message saying, I hereby state that I do not give my permission to use any of my personal data or photos. That is fake, Linda. Also, why would anybody steal your photos? You exclusively post pictures of your elderly cat. You're going to be fine. But things came to a head in 2020 after the Times ran this infamous Tom Cotton op-ed, in which he argued that the US should send federal troops into cities to tamp down protests against police violence. A lot of staffers at the Times argued that it shouldn't have published that editorial, and Barry Weiss wrote a series of tweets about a supposedly heated staff meeting, characterising it as a civil war between the mostly young wokes and the mostly 40 and up liberals. That claim was strongly disputed by others at the paper, with one editor saying, I'm in the same meeting that Barry appears to be live tweeting. This is inaccurate in both characterisations. It's not a civil war, it's an editorial conversation, and it's not breaking down along generational lines. So, to be fair, it seems Barry Weiss does have some reporting experience, specifically trying to report what was happening in a meeting, only to have her own co-worker say, hey, what the fuck are you talking about? Now, shortly after that, she resigned, posting a lengthy resignation letter to her website, claiming that her forays into wrongthink had made her the subject of constant bullying by colleagues who disagree with my views. And she now tells the story of that letter in some pretty self-mythologizing terms.
I thought to myself, I have a choice to make. I can stay. And in where I lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, Seinfeld territory, telling people you worked at the New York Times really meant something. Got you a good table at a good restaurant, among other things. And it meant a lot to me, because I felt like, wow, like I made it. Or I could leave, and I could give up the prestige, give up the platform, have no plan for what I'm doing next, but leave with my integrity. So I left with a resignation letter, sort of heard around the world. It was my Jerry Maguire moment.
Okay. Self-aggrandizing bullshit aside, let's not reduce the Upper West Side to just Seinfeld territory. It's the site of many other cultural touchdowns, like You've Got Mail, Will and Grace, and that time the night before the Macy's parade when Balloon Spider-Man made an absolute meal out of Uncle Sam's ass. My point is, the Upper West Side is more than just one thing. Anyway, she quickly launched her own publication, first as a Substack called Common Sense, and later as a full-blown media company, The Free Press. Its first motto was honest news for sane people, which feels scientifically engineered to trigger an eye roll. Here she is, not long after starting it, making her pitch.
I want to create the media company where people can go for the best podcasts, the best reporting, the best analysis, basically combining the blue chip high quality of the old media landscape with the punk energy of the new political realignment.
Okay, first, it is pretty hard to claim you've got punk energy when you essentially spout conservative talking points while dressed like the front desk manager at a Courtyard Marriott. I, for one, do not trust the punk bona fides of anyone wearing an Ann Taylor collarless silk blouse. But it turns out, like most punk rock things, the Free Press was quickly bankrolled by a string of reactionary billionaires like venture capitalist Mark Andreessen and David Sachs. And in the 5 years since, it's grown to roughly 1.5 million readers, although only around 1 in 10 actually pay to subscribe, meaning it generates subscription revenues of about $15 million a year, which isn't nothing, but I would argue also not quite enough to justify someone spending $150 million to acquire it, as that is a revenues to valuation ratio that would make Mr. Wonderful start vomiting blood. Anyway, Weiss has since stocked the Free Press with staffers who, in some cases, are quick to brag that, like her, they are proud refugees from the mainstream media.
Hey, I'm Lucy. I'm the social media editor here at the Free Press, and today I'm going to ask my coworkers the moment they realized they were free pressers. Olivia, when did you realize that you were a free presser?
When I was reporting on President Trump and they inserted the word racist into the headline.
Okay, so just to be clear, she was apparently reporting for NPR, even though that bleep makes it seem like she used to write for an outlet called the Fuckhole Times or something. and the word racist was atop a story of hers about public response to Trump saying these 4 members of Congress, all American citizens, 3 of whom were born in the US, should go back to the countries they came from. And I guess if you're not ready to call that racist, the Free Press might be the place for you. One of Barry Weiss's go-to lines is that she's only interested in the truth. In announcing her decision to go to CBS this week, she said, America cannot thrive without common facts, common truths, and a common reality, which sounds great. But watch her articulate the Free Press's approach to arriving at the truth and see if you can spot a small problem with it.
The identity of our brand is truth-seeking, and our premise is you cannot get to truth in an echo chamber. The only way that you get to truth is by sitting next to this is what makes it so different from any newsroom I've ever worked in.
Right.
Sitting next to someone who disagrees with you, who you still respect, admire them, and collaborate with them.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that is how you do it as an opinion writer, but that is not how you get to truth as a reporter, is it? You do that by leaving the newsroom and reporting. That's why I say the only way to hold Henry Kissinger's skull in your hand is by sitting next to someone who disagrees with you. No, that's not it. You do that by leaving your desk, breaking into Dick Cheney's house, going into his master bathroom and taking it out of its jar. And I'll be honest, there's not a ton of hard journalism on the Free Press site. There's really not much of anything there. There's usually just a handful of new posts a day, which can even include weird shit like editorial cartoons from David Mamet, the playwright. And if you're thinking, I didn't realise David Mamet could draw, fun fact, he can't. But don't worry, because that hasn't stopped him from producing cartoons like this one that says, what's the best way to deal with detractors? With the answer being a manual for tractors. Or this one supposedly about environmentalism that just says shoving eggs up the tushies of chickens. Or this one of an autobiography by Kermit the Frog with a blurb that says ribbiting, which I'm worried might be too funny. There are also a ton of first-person clickbait essays with titles like I can explain why the Nazi salute is back. I criticised BLM, then I was fired. I took religion out of Christmas, I regret it. I want people to have more kids, does that make me far right? I was called an inbred swine at Princeton last night. I'm 17 and I'm immunised from woke politics. My family was hunted by Nazis, but I was fired for defending Hitler. My husband wants to be cremated, I'd ignore his dying wish, and I used to hate Trump, now I'm a MAGA lefty. At this point, it feels like we're just 2 weeks away from them posting an article titled, "I dressed my dead wife up as Hitler for her funeral, and now her woke family is mad at me." And look, if you go to the homepage of the Free Press, it might not immediately read as a particularly conservative outlet, but once you start reading its articles, the pronounced theme that starts to emerge is the left has gone too far. Basically, whatever issue you feel like that is true for, Israel, campus politics, DEI or police reform, you'll find articles there to reinforce that opinion. And look, I'm not saying the left never goes too far or that it's immune from criticism at all. But it can sometimes feel like the Free Press's conclusions can get out ahead of its evidence, which brings us to the fact that some of its pieces can be pretty poorly fact-checked and in ways that feel important. And let's look at 3 key examples. First, take one of its biggest splashes. This article, "I thought I was saving trans kids, now I'm blowing the whistle." It's an account by Jamie Reed, who'd worked as a caseworker at the Washington University Transgender Center. Her piece claims that the clinic was harming patients by, among other things, routinely approving adolescents for medical transitions without proper mental health assessments, calling its work morally and medically appalling. Now, that story understandably got a ton of attention, including from public officials, which prompted Weiss to go on Megyn Kelly's podcast to take something of a victory lap.
The day after the piece published, I've never seen such a sort of rapid reaction to a piece of journalism. Missouri's Attorney General announced an investigation into the gender clinic. The reason that this story was especially important and gratifying for us to have substantiated was because it's exactly the kind of story that we exist to pursue. It's exactly the kind of morally naughty story in which journalists avoid pursuing it because they know they will be punished or smeared for doing so. That is why the Free Press exists.
Wow, that is an exceptional amount of self-congratulation, and the bar was already set at the Jerry Maguire moment heard around the world. But she is right. The state AG apparently found that article, to borrow a term, riveting, because they soon announced an investigation into the centre, and it ultimately stopped treating minors, with Reed's claims even being used to help justify a statewide ban on gender-affirming care for them. So it did have real impact, which is what makes it so awkward. When Washington University conducted its own investigation, they found that allegations of substandard care causing adverse outcomes for patients at the centre were unsubstantiated. And when other outlets reported the story out again and again, their findings did not match what the Free Press published. For instance, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch found dozens of former patients and parents at the clinic who told them their experiences sharply contradicted the examples supplied by Reed. NBC spent 2 months reaching out to nearly 40 people associated with the centre and got the same result, with patients and parents saying the care they received was thorough and slow. And the Missouri Independent found parents who told them any treatments their kids received were only undertaken after long consultations with doctors and mental health professionals, and often patients were told they needed to wait 4 years. In fact, at worst, follow-up reporting showed that as more patients sought care, the clinic became overwhelmed as its employees grappled with how best to help patients. And to be fair, the Times did find some former patients who had complaints, including one who'd since detransitioned and felt there'd been a major lack of care and consideration from the centre. But even that article, which Weiss claimed vindicated their story, said it's clear the clinic benefited many adolescents, with patients and parents saying their experiences were overwhelmingly positive. And the thing is, some of Reed's marquee examples just don't hold up on further inspection. For instance, she cited the harrowing story of a patient she claimed suffered liver toxicity from medication she was prescribed at the centre, and whose mother was so distraught, she sent a message saying they were lucky her family was not the type to sue. That sounds pretty striking. But when the Times spoke with that family, they were stunned to read this characterisation of their daughter's case, saying she only experienced liver problems after getting COVID and taking another drug with possible liver side effects. As for threatening a lawsuit, they were adamant that never happened, to the point they went on local news to refute the whole story.
It's not just not true, but it's a lie.
You can't see their faces.
We're in shadow, but we're not hiding.
But you can hear their voices.
There's lies, and people have paid for that in the transgender community.
Did you ever say that you were going to sue the clinic or ever allude to suing the clinic?
No. Nope.
The parent's message goes on to say they don't regret any decision, and would never have denied their daughter these life-saving treatments.
We have still had no regrets.
It's blatant exploitation of my daughter's medical situation.
Yeah, that mother felt that the story was blatant exploitation of her daughter's medical situation, or as I guess Barry would describe it, harnessing the punk energy of the new political realignment. And look, I get her frustration at seeing misinformation about her daughter go far and wide. In fact, when we reached out to that mother, she told us, "I've been fighting for the truth about that damn Free Press article for a while." And if you're getting the sense that the Free Press isn't about to let whatever fact-checking they do get in the way of a story they want to tell you, that also extends to some of the original reporting they do. Take this piece that they published last year about Austin, claiming crime had soared there under a progressive DA named Jose Garza. It prominently featured a billionaire named Daniel Lebetsky, the founder of Kind Snacks, who'd moved to Austin a few years earlier and was supporting a primary campaign to elect a more moderate DA. The story claimed that Austin's crime wave was leading many of its most buzzed-about new residents, and some of its wealthiest, to worry it might become the next San Francisco. But as local news there pointed out, there was a pretty big hole in that piece's argument.
But this article from a website called The Free Press, one of the first lines, hopefully we can pop it up right here on the screen, one of the first lines of the article claims crimes in Austin has soared under a progressive district attorney. This morning, the numbers tell us that that is just not the case. We looked at crime reporting data from Austin Police. So in December of 2020, before Jose Garza took over, 20,500 crimes against people were committed throughout the entire year. A few years later, in 2023, with Garza as DA for a couple of years, the number was 2,000 fewer than in the same time frame.
Yeah, it's true, and it is kind of striking that even local news was like, "Girl, calm down." Because the only thing they usually love more than overhyping crime is maybe dogs running 5Ks. This just in, woof woof, pant pant, good boy goes fast. And finally, there's this piece the Free Press recently posted about media coverage of young people starving in Gaza. It concerned photos that it said had helped convince a growing number of Americans that Israel has induced famine and is committing war crimes in Gaza. There is a lot wrong with this article. For one thing, it questions how starvation and famine have been measured